Hello, my name is Christian DeLucia. Thank you for joining me. And this slide set is on mediators versus moderators from a conceptual point of view. So in 1986, nearly 40 years ago, Barron and Kenny wrote their now classic paper on distinguishing moderator and mediator variables. And although in the last 40 years, I'm sure the field has come a long way, we still have some progress to make. And so I'm hoping that this brief primer on the topic will help students distinguish between mediators and moderators, at least at a conceptual level. So first off, let's think about three kinds of variables. I've got them labeled on this slide as the primary predictor variable, which is often referred to as the independent variable, the outcome variable, which is often referred to as the dependent variable or criterion variable. And then finally, we've got the M variable, either a mediator or a moderator, depending on the context. Let's start out by looking at a definition for a moderator. I like to, when I talk about moderation in my classes, I like to start by introducing the concept of statistical interactions, because when we test for moderators, we're testing for statistical interactions. So a statistical interaction is present when the association between a predictor variable and an outcome varies over levels of a second predictor variable, and this obviously assumes a two-variable interaction. In this situation, we could substitute the word moderator for the second predictor, leading us to our definition for moderator. We can say that a moderator affects the nature of the association between the primary predictor and the outcome. I want to walk you through two examples of hypothetical moderators. The first example I label the stress buffer. Let's assume that the association between stress, in this instance, our primary predictor variable, and depression, our outcome variable, varies as a function of social support, which is our hypothetical moderator. More specifically, let's assume for individuals with lower levels of support, the association between stress and depression is strong and positive. And for those with higher levels of social support, the association between stress and depression is functionally zero. In this case, one might say that the effects of stress on depression are moderated by social support because social support acts as a stress buffer. Let's take a look at some hypothetical data from this scenario. On the x-axis, we have stress. On the y-axis, depression. Our blue line is the line coding the linear association between stress and depression for individuals with low levels of social support. And the red line is the line coding the linear association between stress and depression for individuals with high levels of social support. And when we look at the plot, two things catch your eye. One is the difference in slopes between these two lines. The association between stress and depression is strong and positive for individuals reporting low levels of social support, and it's much weaker, and we're going to say functionally zero, for individuals reporting higher levels of social support. And remember, go back to our definition for an interaction. An interaction is present when the effects of a predictor on an outcome vary over levels of a second predictor. And so we see that dependency here in our picture, in that for individuals with low social support, the association between stress and depression is strong and positive, and for individuals at high social support, it's weak and functionally zero. In our second example for moderators, we're going to talk about sex as a treatment moderator. Let's assume that in a treatment outcome trial, women respond more favorably to treatment than do men. One way we might see this is by looking at an interaction between sex and intervention condition on a post-test assessment. And when we might see that women in the treatment condition look much better off than women in the control condition, but when we look at men, that relative difference is not as large. I have that hypothetical example pictured here on this slide. On the left-hand side, we have women. On the right-hand side, men. The blue bar is for control participants. The red bar is for treated participants. And we could see that the treated women are doing much better on post-test depression relative to control women. That same difference, however, between treated and control men looks much smaller in magnitude. And in a situation like this, we might say that sex moderated the intervention effect. It's present for women, but functionally zero for men. Okay, let's shift gears and talk about mediators. In their seminal paper, Barron and Kenny originally defined the mediator as the generative mechanism through which a primary predictor impacts an outcome. When I teach mediation, I often evoke the concept of a roadmap. I tell my students, you have to, when you're thinking about mediated effects, you have to be thinking about the paths that predictors take in influencing or impacting the outcomes they're associated with. Okay. I'm going to go over a couple of examples of mediators. In our first example, we've got positive alcohol expectancies as a mediator. Let's hypothesize that preteens who grow up in homes with more frequent alcohol use develop stronger positive expectancies for the effects of alcohol, which might ultimately lead to higher levels of problematic alcohol use. In this model, more frequent alcohol use in the home is the primary predictor. Positive expectancies for the effects of alcohol is the putative mediator, and problem alcohol use is the outcome. On this slide, I've got two figures representing mediation. Figure 1.1, I label here the generic mediator diagram. On the left-hand side, we've got the primary predictor variable in the blue box. In the center of the figure, we've got the mediator in the green box. And then on the right-hand side of the figure, we've got the outcome in the red box. And I've got three paths shown in the diagram. The path labeled A is the path that links the primary predictor to the mediator. The path labeled B is the path that links the mediator to the outcome. And the path labeled C prime is the path that links the primary predictor to the outcome, controlling for the mediator. And then I'm not really going to talk about the statistical analysis involved in testing for mediators, but I do say here that the mediated effect is often referred to as the indirect effect, and it's tested as a product of the A and B paths. And then the direct effect, C prime, is the effect of the primary predictor on the outcome, statistically controlling for the effects of the mediator. Now, on the lower part of the slide, I've got the specific hypothetical mediator model from the prior slide. So on the left-hand side, we've got frequent alcohol use in the home as the primary predictor. In the middle, we've got positive alcohol expectancies as the mediator. And on the right-hand side, we've got problematic alcohol use as the outcome. And then those plus signs there just are meant to denote the nature of the association between the variables in question. So positive alcohol expectancies are hypothesized to have a positive association with problem alcohol use. Okay, in our second mediator example, we're going to shift gears and talk about a putative mediator of an intervention trial. So let's assume that that we've got an intervention delivered to youth with early substance use problems, and one of our clinical targets or putative mediators is increased parent supervision of youth behavior. Okay, so in this model, we might predict that exposure to the intervention, the primary predictor, results in higher levels of parent supervision of youth behavior, which is the mediator, which ultimately results in lower levels of substance use, or the outcome. So in figure 2, I've got our hypothetical example laid out here. On the left-hand side, exposure to the intervention. In the middle, parent supervision. On the right-hand side, substance use. And so we're saying individuals in the intervention condition are going to be higher on parent supervision relative to individuals in the control condition. we're assuming that individuals higher on parent supervision are going to have youth reporting lower levels of substance use. And we're also assuming that the direct effect of the intervention on substance use is also going to be negative, suggesting that individuals exposed to the intervention, those youth will be reporting lower levels of substance use, even after adjusting for the mediator. Okay, so now I want to remind everyone that mediators are part of a causal chain. So in these three variable mediator chains that are described above, it's assumed that the primary predictor causes the mediator, which in turn causes the outcome. And then I just have a caveat there at the second point. Most of the studies in the social sciences that test for mediation fail to meet basic industry standards for inferring causality, even something as simple as temporal precedent. So we have to be mindful of that as we're reading the literature. A few ways to distinguish between mediators and moderators. In psychology, variables like demographic characteristics can be filed neatly in the moderator category. In intervention research, baseline characteristics can be examined as moderators of the intervention, but not examined as mediators of the intervention. This is because baseline characteristics predate the intervention, and that violates the temporal precedence assumption of the causal chain. Okay. Lots of variables, however, could be examined as either moderators or mediators. So the context of their use is needed to identify their status. And obviously, this is where things get a little tricky. And I often remind my students that even though Barron and Kenny wrote their paper 40 years ago, there's still a lot of confusion in the literature about whether individuals are testing for mediation or moderation. And so I remind my students that you can't necessarily rely on the authors of the paper you're reading to be using the terms properly. So the onus is on the reader still. Here are some resources that talk about mediators and moderators, both conceptually and statistically. I hope you found this slide set helpful. Thanks for watching.